Hello and welcome to this week's edition of CHI, the Contemporary History Intervention. The module that I'm currently teaching, the mess we're in, is about looking at current events and what we can contribute to their understanding as historians. That's always a risky enterprise, and sometimes it's a painful exercise, and it certainly is this week. This week's topic is political leaders and political leadership. And if we talk about that topic in March 2022, there is just no way to talk about leaders and leadership without thought about the painful events that are unfolding in Ukraine. Putin's war, a war that you just cannot imagine without thoughts about the leaders. Now, it's several generations of history students that have been taught that no great men do not make history. Well, there is very little greatness in the current war in Ukraine, but we certainly realize that this idea that men don't make history, well, it has opened our historical imagination, but it also has left a void. We talk about political leaders without a clear vocabulary about what we should do. Of course, we can point out that there are wider contexts. It's just great men. And we can point out that the myth of the strong leader is exactly that. That is the book that this author has written, Archie Brown, where it basically tells us that no, great leaders are not superhumans. They are humans like everyone else. And assuming that they are smarter, better, more clever is just wrong. Well, maybe that is so, but that doesn't help us much as we try to find narratives that work for political leaders. So how do you approach a topic like this? Well, our approach this week is to go to the classics, to look at Max Weber's essay, Politics as a Vocation, written in German and going back to a speech of January 1919. Of course, we read the English translation that some of the students were struggling with. This is intellectual German, hard to translate, and, well, not an easy read probably, but then, of course, the entire idea of university teaching is to go beyond the comfort zone. And it was certainly an essay that resonated with our students. In this essay, Max Weber argues that there are three qualities of a good politician. It is passion for a cause, it is a feeling of responsibility, and a sense of proportion. So the ideal politician has a certain calmness, a certain realism to himself or herself in today's age where politicians can and should be female too. And this idea of a certain calm, sober-eyed, realistic leadership, the sane, the professional, the knowledgeable person, that certainly resonated with the students that I had in class today. They like politicians who know what they're doing, who are informed, who get knowledge from professionals, who do not think too much about themselves. That is one of the arch sins of the politician, according to Weber. Vanity is what a politician must never strive to be. Do not think too much about yourself, but think about what you can achieve. That's certainly something that shapes and influences the thinking of today's students. This is no longer the type of generation that needs to be told that leadership can look different than Churchill. In fact, I specifically asked for whether we need an exorcism of Winston Churchill to talk about leadership today, and was told, well, Frank, that's really things that we've gone. For today's students, Churchill is like that grand uncle that is just part of the family and still around and somehow still talked about, but really more of an embarrassment than anything that you talk about leadership, and actually put that to the test. And I explicitly asked today's students whether someone would like to stand up and speak in defense of Winston Churchill. That could be your finest hour. That's the extremes to which I went, but nobody wanted to speak up and defend Winston Churchill. And please note that this happened exactly one day after Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky spoke to the House of Commons and invoked the words of Winston Churchill. That is yesterday's talk and yesterday's politician. So far so good, but then we kept talking and kept thinking about Max Weber, and turned out that maybe this sober, realistic approach, the sense of proportion, the feeling of responsibility well, maybe that came down to a type of politician that, well, was a bit lifeless, a bit too cool, too clinical. Didn't we end up with a type of politician that is a mere plumber in the grand machinery of everyday politics? Isn't there something more to the politician? Isn't there stagecraft, an element of staging, an element of acting out? Shouldn't there be a real character behind the politician? These were concerns that were raised. Today's student generations wants a certain sober approach, a certain realism, but it definitely does not want politicians straight from central casting. There should be a personality in there, a character in there, not too much, but it is certainly a requirement for political leaders in the 21st century. It was interesting to listen to the names that came up in today's discussion. A very prominent name was Jacinda Ardern, the Prime Minister of New Zealand, young, female, and a mother. Kamala Harris was mentioned, and Sarah Palin was mentioned, and the latter probably did not come up because her political positions, to the extent that she has them, really struck a nerve, but because, well, our panopticon of political leaders is still exceedingly male, and it will probably take several generations until our visions, our ideas, our visual impression of the political class resemble the society that we live in its full diversity. So as we talk about as a statesman, we talk about a role that is probably more male than healthy. Of course, students are aware that there are other people out there, people who like a prime minister who has written a Churchill biography, an adoring one. That is what Boris Johnson did, as you know. And they know that there are people who fall for Trump, who, looking at the statesman and the template that is left, is a bit of a farcical reenactment of statesmanship. But it's not just that. If you listen closely to today's discussion, you realize that the charismatic statement, the personality, the individual who takes a country into his or her hands, that is not an idea that is gone and as gone as Churchill is. It's still there in elements, in thoughts, in expectations. So when we talk about statesmanship and about the politicians, we talk about something that is still there in fragments and their expectations, not longer alive and going strong, but not completely dead either. In other words, when we talk about leadership, we come up in that same void of narration that I started with. No, we're no longer writing adoring biographies of political leaders if we want to be serious historians. But listening to today's students became clear, well, they're much clearer about the type of leadership that they do not want than about the leaders that they want.